Hi, David. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah.
Good. Please tell us, just give us an introduction about who David Dickinson is.
Okay. Well, as those listening will know, I'm from the UK. I
Yeah.
still have my English accent, having lived here for slightly over 30 years now.
Yeah.
I came here from the UK in 1994, full of optimism
Mm-hmm.
to contribute to the building of a better society.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still here,
Yeah.
and we are still trying to build a better society.
Mm-hmm.
I actually came to this university to work as a lecturer in the economics department. I did my PhD looking at industrial relations on the East Rand
Mm-hmm.
and increasingly became involved in South African issues. Came back, actually worked in the Wits Business School for 9 years, teaching industrial relations to the MBA students.
Mm-hmm.
Moved in 2009 to the Department of Sociology, where I was a professor there for 15 years. I took the opportunity in 2022 to do my candidate returnship here at LHR at the Land and Housing Programme. And then last year I took early retirement from the university, although I still teach one course. And now I'm an attorney with Lawyers for Human Rights.
Okay. It's an interesting story. And last month we saw the article, right? And it was based on ghost houses in townships. And it's a very interesting and I think today's episode is based on that. It's based on the article that you wrote that triggered a few people, and some people wanted to know more. We've had demands from our social media platforms where they wanted more insights, just to break it down a bit further. But before then, we're gonna start with an icebreaker session. This game is called Quickfire. So I'm just going to ask you questions based on your experience with the law and your academia. So you have to answer in 1 second. So the first question is, if you had to choose between the two things, between law and sociology, which one would you pick?
I need to choose socio-legal.
Okay. Between street justice and courtroom justice?
I actually think street justice is the first priority.
Okay. Fighting injustice in South Africa or globally?
Local is global.
Okay. Between pro bono legal work or teaching students?
You? Well, I guess I'm answering that with my feet, aren't I?
Mm-hmm. Truth or fairness?
Two things are inseparable.
How?
You can't have fairness without truth.
Okay. Nelson Mandela or Oliver Tambo?
Oh, well, I'd have to go with Nelson Mandela, but that might be the wrong choice.
Okay. Housing rights or workers' rights?
Okay. I don't think you can play one off against the other.
Mm-hmm. One bigger legal reform today or a lifetime of slow progress?
Let's go for the big bang.
Mm-hmm. Reading a book or writing one?
I like writing.
Arguing in court or debating in class?
There's a lot of false dichotomies in this game.
Mm-hmm.
I probably enjoy debating in class. It's more flexible. One of the problems with courts outside of the Constitutional Court is that it's very rigid, unfortunately.
Okay, no. Thank you for playing this game with us. I think we've set the tone. So one of the few questions that was asked on social media and by people via calls is, what are ghost houses?
Well, it's a term that I coined for the purpose of the article. And I obviously wanted to have something that would draw attention to the problem. And it was necessary to do so because of the many issues that we face in South Africa. This is one of the issues that's not apparent in the public discourses. And I think I start the article with saying a lot of attention is, in terms of housing, goes to the RDP program and to the inadequacies and problems, and also to the growth of informal settlements around the periphery, which is very visible and I think very frightening to many people, although of course not to the people who are making opportunities from it. So the issue of the housing stock within the townships, and I think you're going to go up and ask me more about that. I wanted to get to this problem where houses are increasingly in the legal title in the name of someone who's deceased, hence the ghost houses. So that's what a ghost house is, and as much as there's a definition, it's a house in which the title deed is held by a deceased person.
Okay, makes sense. And why do you think so many township homes end up in this kind of situations? And
how do we arrive at the situation where we have? Well, there's a bit of history that has to be raised here. So under apartheid, of course, the idea was that black people, African people, would not be part of the urban areas which were exclusively white. That, of course, was impossible because apartheid depended on black labour, on cheap labour. So, but nevertheless, the various iterations of the various stages of apartheid attempted to control the movement of people. And one of those key factors was that there would be no permanency for black people, for African people in the urban areas. So the townships that were built, and the township development, of course, accelerated enormously after '48 and the election of the National Party and the beginning of apartheid proper. But we have to recognise that there was segregation prior to that. There was very little freehold ownership. So the houses were, in a way, they were provided for workers, but on the basis of the permits. And there was the various permits depending on legal status for the vast majority of houses in the urban areas. And they were allocated to the head of the household, which was a man. That's another story, which London Housing Programme has been very involved in over the years. But it was a permit system. You were allowed to stay in the house of your family so long as you had the rights to stay in the urban area. And if you lost your rights in the urban area, typically through not being able to work, then you had to go back to the so-called homelands. So this was a permit system. It was an administrative system where you went to the municipality that owned the houses. They owned the houses, but you just had the right to live in there through this permit. And you would register who was in there, whether there were family members that fell under you, under the man, the head of the household, or lodgers. I mean, this all had to be done by administrative system. Now, obviously, when we moved from apartheid, this system had to change. And we had two acts, the so-called Ultra Act and the Conversion Act, and they dealt with different parts under different situations, but both operated to some extent in terms of the urban townships. And what this did was allow for transfer of ownership. And so it was a transfer of the housing stock of the townships from the municipalities, typically, although not just, there's a whole configuration of different ownership structures in these places, some national government departments and so on, to those residents. So in effect, there was a transfer of ownership and the giving of title deeds. Now that's still ongoing. We still hear about it. It's not completed, but large numbers of houses were transferred shortly after, around the early 90s and onwards. And that transfer was done administratively. So it meant you didn't pay. You simply got the title deed given to you. Now, what's happening, of course, is that that generation that received those houses in their name, and there's quite a few complications around that, but they're starting to die off if they were adults or even older people at the time. Now then we come to, well, why don't they then transfer that into somebody else's name within the family? And what this article focuses on is actually the economic costs of doing so.
Yes.
And there's two stages that the article talks about. There are actually other barriers.
Yeah. I think we'll get to that.
Okay.
We just wanted, the history behind our situation when it comes to ghost houses. So a lot of people assume that when a parent passes away, then the children will have to inherit. Why in this situation? Why isn't that simple? Why do we have to?
Well, they may well inherit.
Yeah.
There's cultural inheritance and there's legal inheritance.
Sure.
And there's a complication here about something called the family house, which is subject of a different discussion. In terms of the legal system of this country, you can inherit in two ways. One is that somebody writes a will and they say, I give my house to so and so. The other is intestate. If you die without a will, then the law determines who would inherit. And if both parents are dead, then that would fall onto the children and to the grandchildren and so on. So that the family house involves custom, and there we have how traditionally inheritance has operated within African culture, which doesn't correspond with either of those two legal systems in different ways. There wouldn't be freedom of testation in cultural. There'll be some limited freedom of testation, but basically it's primogeniture. It's through the male.
Yes.
It goes through the male, not through children as a group. And also there'll be. So in a way, maybe it's a form of African intestate, but that's obviously conflicting the two things. So anyway, let's say that you write a will and you give the house to somebody, or by intestate law that house falls to you. That doesn't mean that it's your house in the legal terms. So what we have in South Africa, or at least in the old white areas, the urban areas, is a cadastral system, which is very common around the world, in which all property is recorded by the deeds office. This is the agency that does it. So if you don't have a title deed relating to that piece of land, which the deeds office has a register, you may have inherited the house in terms of a will, you may have, or through intestate succession, but that's not registered in your name, and you don't have legal title to it. Now then, there's two steps. The first is, how do we sort out the estate of the dead person and the costs that are attached to that? And once you've done that, there then has to be a transfer of title. And those are two separate processes, although they'll mesh together. There are other processes such as, but let's leave that for now. So those are the two areas which cost money, which people or families who inherited a house via the transfer now need to transfer to the name of somebody else or the names of other people. But they don't have the assets to do that. All they have is the asset, typically, of the house. This was stimulated by the partnership that LHR has with the Orange Farm Human Rights Advice Centre. And we assist one day a week with their advice centre. And I've been going down there for the last year. And so these problems are coming in. And I think it's a very important point that if we want to understand the problems in South Africa, we need to actually get down on the ground and experience these things, and then put two and two together. Once you start to get clients coming in and you're seeing a pattern, then you start to do the research to see if that's truly is a widespread issue. So the issue of letter of authority is linked to the management of an estate. That's when somebody dies. What happens to their property? Now, the law, the administration of estates law, it sets a threshold of the value of the estate, and then it goes two different ways. So small estates are dealt with them in a much less bureaucratic way.
Okay.
What can be issued by a magistrate's court or the deeds office is a letter of authority.
Okay.
That then is given to the person who it's given to. So typically it would be a child, or the oldest child, more typically, or the most responsible child that the family agrees of the deceased parents, and says, now you have to manage what happens to the estate of the dead person. Now, there is a common misconception in the townships that the letter of authority means that you can choose where the estate goes. That's not the case at all. It means that you have authority to manage the estate. So if the person had a will, you have to look at the will and follow the wishes of the deceased person via the will. If they had no will, you have to follow intestate law. Whether that always happens is a completely another matter. But that level is 250,000. So below the estate is valued of the dead person, of the deceased, is below 250,000. It's a letter of authority. Okay. Easy to get.
So just to pause you right there. So if the deceased estate, the value of the deceased estate is below 250,000, then the person of interest has to go to the magistrate court to obtain that.
Yes, it's a good point. I mean,
if it's above 250,
then there's a different process.
Okay.
And what I liked about the point you were raising is, just whatever the size of the estate, there is a formal process you should go through. Not, but by no means this happens. Okay. Many estates in the township are done informally.
Is there a minimum threshold? It's only
it's the estate. I mean, unfortunately, in this country, many people die without anything of any value, and it's just done informally. But by law, every person who dies, there should be some formal process of managing their estates.
Okay.
Yeah. So above 250,000, it's a more onerous process. First of all, you have to go to the deeds office to get a letter of executorship, not a letter of authority, a letter of executorship. The first thing the deeds office says to you, and people come back from the deeds office to the advice centre with a list of things that they have to do, is that they're going to have to appoint a legal practitioner to manage the estate. And for those of you who've been to law school, we've all learned that the 3.5% of the estate can be taken as a fee. There's also expenses to think about that by law there has to be advertising. And so it jumps into a more expensive category at that point. And this is where it gets difficult. Often the only major asset in the estate is the house in which people are living. Now, so if we go to the over 250,000, we can talk about about how many houses in the township are over that level. Then you've got to find money to pay this lawyer to deal with the management of the estate. 3.5% plus VAT plus expenses.
And I like what you mentioned there, that you would find that in communities the only thing that is of value,
significant value,
it's the house,
right? So now go on.
And there's cost to obtaining that house as beneficiaries.
So if you've got someone who's willing to shell out the money, you're okay. Otherwise you get to this absurd situation. So that the house can be legally into the name of another person, you have to sell the house to get the money to do that, which is just nuts, right? Obviously. So that's the first barrier, is simply managing the estate. And if it's over 250,000, it involves considerable cost because you have to involve a legal professional. That's what, unless you're a legal professional yourself, but we're not talking about that situation. So that's the first barrier, that you have to raise the money to pay the legal professional, and many families can't.
And these issues happen in vulnerable communities where,
well, absolutely,
economic,
right. People are not working typically.
It's very
people relying on that house are often unemployed or living on social grants or on minimum wage. there simply isn't the money to shell out. Because if you look at 250,000, let's say the house is 250,000, just the legal costs of the letter of executiveship management is going to come to around 13,000. I mean, it depends on the legal practitioner. They could do less on a pro bono basis. They could do more. So you're talking about a significant amount of money, and that's only the first hurdle to get this house transferred from the name of the deceased parent, let's say, to one of the children or grandchildren or a number of them.
Thank you for tuning in on the first season, episode 1 of Ghost Houses and Inherited Injustice series with David Dickinson. Please do tune in on the second episode, episode 2, where we dive deeper into the history of ghost houses and the financial implication associated with registering or executing a deceased estate in townships. Please like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Lawyers for Human Rights.